The old house at the end of Cedar Lane had always been a source of curiosity for the townsfolk. It stood abandoned for decades, its windows shattered and its roof caving in. Rumors whispered of dark deeds that had transpired within its walls long ago. No one dared venture too close after sundown, for fear of the restless spirits said to haunt its halls. One stormy night, a group of adventurous teenagers decided to test their courage. Armed with flashlights and nervous laughter, they approached the house, their hearts pounding with excitement and fear. The wind howled through the trees, casting eerie shadows across the overgrown lawn. As they stepped through the broken gate, a sense of foreboding gripped them. The air was heavy with the scent of decay and something more sinister. Floorboards creaked underfoot as they cautiously explored each room, the darkness swallowing their feeble beams of light. In the attic, they stumbled upon an old trunk covered in dust and cobwebs. With trembling hands, they pried it open, revealing yellowed photographs and letters that spoke of a tragedy long forgotten. Suddenly, a cold gust of wind slammed the attic door shut behind them, trapping them in darkness. Panic set in as they struggled to reopen the door, their flashlights flickering weakly. Shadows danced on the walls, morphing into grotesque shapes that seemed to whisper their fears. Footsteps echoed from the floor below, slow and deliberate, drawing closer with each passing moment. Just as they feared they were trapped forever in the grip of the house's malevolent spirit, the door burst open with a deafening crash. They stumbled out into the night, breathless and shaken, leaving behind the haunted house and its secrets. To this day, the teenagers swear they saw faces peering out from the attic window as they fled, eyes filled with sorrow and longing. The old house at the end of Cedar Lane remains untouched by time, a silent witness to the horrors of its past. Months passed since that fateful night at the old house on Cedar Lane, but the memory haunted the teenagers who had dared to enter its forsaken halls. Each of them found themselves plagued by strange dreams, whispers in the dark, fleeting glimpses of faces at windows, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Sarah, one of the girls from the group, was particularly affected. She began experiencing inexplicable phenomena in her own home. Objects moving on their own, cold spots that sent shivers down her spine, and a pervasive feeling of unease. Her friends, too, reported similar occurrences. Knocks on doors when no one was there, and chilling drafts even in rooms sealed tight. They tried to dismiss these events as overactive imaginations, but the unease persisted. One evening, Sarah received a package in the mail. No return address, just an old, weathered photograph inside. It depicted a family standing in front of the very same house they had explored that stormy night. The faces in the photograph were hauntingly familiar, resembling those they had glimpsed in the attic window. Determined to unravel the mystery, the group reunited. Armed with newfound resolve, they returned to Cedar Lane, this time in daylight. They combed through local archives, piecing together fragments of history long forgotten. The house, it turned out, had been the site of a tragic murder-suicide decades ago, a family torn apart by jealousy and despair. In their research, they discovered the name of the youngest daughter, Emily, whose spirit was said to roam the house, seeking peace for the souls trapped within. The group realized that by opening the trunk and disturbing the house, they had unwittingly stirred something that had been dormant for years. As they delved deeper, strange occurrences followed them. Unexplained voices on recordings, flickering lights, and the inexplicable feeling of being followed. Sarah, in particular, felt a connection to Emily, sensing her presence wherever they went. Their investigation culminated one stormy night, when they returned to the house armed with candles, incense, and a determination to lay the spirits to rest. With hearts pounding, they ventured into the attic once more, facing the darkness and the memories it held. In a solemn ceremony, they offered prayers and apologies to the spirits that lingered. They burned sage and uttered words of peace and forgiveness, hoping to bring closure to those who had suffered within those walls. As they did, a profound stillness descended upon the house, the oppressive atmosphere lifting like a heavy fog. Since that night, Cedar Lane has been quiet. The old house stands silent and empty, no longer whispering its secrets to the wind. The The teenagers have moved on with their lives, forever changed by their encounter with the supernatural. But sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind blows just right, they still hear faint echoes of laughter and the rustling of leaves around the old house on Cedar Lane. Years passed, and the events at the old house on Cedar Lane became a distant, almost surreal memory for Sarah and her friends. They had grown up, moved away, started families of their own, but the bond forged by that eerie experience remained unbreakable. Sarah, now a mother of two, found herself revisiting the past in unexpected ways. Her children loved hearing spooky stories before bed, and Sarah often found herself recounting tales of their youthful adventures, carefully omitting the darker details. Yet, even as she spoke, she couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of Cedar Lane still whispered in the corners of her mind. One summer, Sarah's family decided to visit their old hometown for a reunion with friends. It was a nostalgic trip down memory lane, full of laughter and reminiscence. One evening, over a bonfire, the topic of the old house resurfaced among her friends. "I heard they finally tore it down," someone mentioned, sparking a flurry of memories and questions. Sarah felt a chill run down her spine. "Tore it down?" she echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah, a couple of years ago," her friend replied. "The town council decided it was a hazard. They said it had become a magnet for troublemakers and ghost hunters." Sarah's mind raced. What had become of the spirits that had lingered in those crumbling walls? Had their attempt to appease them all those years ago been in vain? Unable to ignore the gnawing curiosity, Sarah found herself drawn back to Cedar Lane the next day. The sight that greeted her was both familiar and unsettling. A vacant lot where the house had once stood, surrounded by a chain-link fence adorned with no trespassing signs. She approached cautiously, memories flooding back with every step. The air felt heavy, pregnant with the weight of history erased. As she stood there, lost in thought, a soft breeze stirred the overgrown grass, carrying with it a faint whisper, a familiar voice, tinged with sadness and gratitude. Sarah turned, half expecting to see her friends beside her, but there was no one, just the rustling leaves and the distant hum of traffic. Yet, in that moment, she felt a sense of closure, as if the spirits of Cedar Lane had finally found peace. With a bittersweet smile, Sarah walked away, leaving behind the ghosts of her past. The old house on Cedar Lane was gone, but its story lived on in the hearts of those who had dared to confront the darkness within and emerge changed, forever bound by a shared secret that transcended time and space. And as the sun set over Cedar Lane, casting long shadows over the empty lot, Sarah whispered a silent farewell to the spirits she had once known. As Sarah walked away from the vacant lot where the old house on Cedar Lane once stood, a subtle sense of closure settled within her. The whispers of the past seemed to fade with each step, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that the spirits of the house had not entirely departed. That night, as she lay in bed, Sarah found herself dreaming of the old house once more. In her dream, she wandered through its corridors, which were now restored to their former grandeur. The walls no longer bore the scars of neglect. Instead, they gleamed with fresh paint, and sunlight streamed through once darkened windows. She followed a familiar path to the attic, where she had last confronted the restless spirits. To her surprise, the attic was not empty but filled with warmth and a sense of peace. There, standing before her, were the figures from the old photograph, the family whose tragedy had haunted Cedar Lane for decades. Sarah approached them cautiously, unsure of what to expect. But instead of fear or sadness, she felt a profound sense of calm emanating from the spirits. They smiled gently, their eyes filled with gratitude. "We have been waiting for you," said the youngest daughter, Emily, her voice echoing softly in Sarah's mind. Sarah's heart raced as she realized that the spirits were not here to harm her, but to thank her. In their presence, she felt a connection, a shared bond forged through their intertwined fates. "We are at peace now, thanks to your courage and compassion," Emily continued, her voice soothing like a summer breeze. "You and your friends helped us find closure, and for that, we are forever grateful." Tears welled up in Sarah's eyes as she embraced the spirits of Cedar Lane, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't realized she had been carrying for so long. In that moment, she understood that their encounter had been about more than just confronting fear. It had been about healing old wounds and finding redemption for past sins. As dawn broke outside her window, Sarah awoke with a profound sense of peace. The dream had felt so real, yet she knew it wasn't just a dream. It was a message from beyond, a reassurance that the spirits of Cedar Lane had finally found their way home. From that day forward, Sarah carried the memory of Cedar Lane in her heart, a testament to the power of courage and compassion in the face of darkness. And though the old house was gone, its story continued to resonate, a reminder that even in the most haunted places, there is hope for healing and redemption. As she watched her children play in the morning sunlight, Sarah whispered a silent thank you to the spirits who had touched her life so deeply. And somewhere, in the quiet corners of Cedar Lane, a gentle breeze carried their whispers of gratitude, weaving their story into the tapestry of time. Years passed, and Sarah carried the memories of Cedar Lane with her like a cherished secret. She had grown wiser, her experiences at the old house shaping her understanding of the world and its mysteries. Yet, life had moved forward, and Sarah found herself immersed in the everyday joys and challenges of raising a family and pursuing her career. Occasionally, she would revisit Cedar Lane in her thoughts, wondering if the spirits she had encountered had truly found peace. The dreams of the old house and its inhabitants had faded with time, becoming like distant echoes in the corridors of her mind. One summer evening, while browsing through a local bookstore in her hometown, Sarah stumbled upon an old, leather-bound book tucked away in a dusty corner of the history section. The title, Legends and Mysteries of Cedar Lane, caught her eye, and she couldn't resist flipping through its pages. To her surprise, the book chronicled not only the well-known history of Cedar Lane but also included accounts of strange occurrences and supernatural encounters that had been whispered about for generations. Sarah's heart skipped a beat when she came across a chapter titled, The Haunting of Cedar Lane House. As she read, memories flooded back. Details she had long forgotten, like the names and faces of the family whose tragedy had been etched into the very fabric of Cedar Lane. The book described how, after the old house was torn down, the haunting seemed to intensify for a brief period, with reports of mysterious lights and voices heard by passers-by. But then, gradually, the disturbances ceased. Locals speculated that perhaps the spirits had finally found peace, their restless souls laid to rest by an unknown force. Sarah closed the book with a mix of emotions: gratitude for having been a part of something larger than herself, and a lingering curiosity about the mysteries that still lingered in Cedar Lane. She resolved to visit the town once more, to pay her respects to the place that had shaped her in ways she could never fully articulate. One crisp autumn afternoon, Sarah returned to Cedar Lane. The town had changed subtly over the years, yet its essence remained unchanged. The quiet streets lined with old oak trees, the familiar landmarks that held memories of childhood adventures. She found herself standing once more at the vacant lot where the old house had stood. The chain-link fence was gone now, replaced by a small memorial plaque that bore the words, "In memory of those who found peace at Cedar Lane." As she stood there, a sense of closure washed over her. The spirits she had encountered, the family whose story had intertwined with hers, they had left an indelible mark on her soul. And though she could no longer see them or hear their whispers, she knew they were there, somewhere in the fabric of Cedar Lane's history, watching over the town they had once called home. With a final glance at the memorial plaque, Sarah turned away, her heart lighter than it had been in years. The ghosts of Cedar Lane had taught her that even in the face of darkness, there is always the possibility of redemption and peace. And as she walked back to her car, the autumn leaves crunching beneath her feet, Sarah whispered a silent thank you to the spirits who had guided her on a journey of discovery and healing. A journey that had begun in fear and ended in understanding. As Sarah walked back to her car, a sense of peace enveloped her. The ghosts of Cedar Lane felt closer than ever, their presence a comforting presence rather than a haunting one. She couldn't shake the feeling that they had guided her steps back to this place, urging her to remember their story and to share it with others. Inspired by her experiences, Sarah decided to delve deeper into the history of Cedar Lane. She spent hours at the local library, poring over old newspapers, historical records, and interviewing longtime residents who still remembered the stories passed down through generations. Through her research, Sarah uncovered more about the family whose tragedy had cast a long shadow over Cedar Lane. She discovered that they had once been prominent members of the community, their lives filled with both joy and sorrow. The events that led to their demise were tragic yet human, a tale of love and betrayal, of dreams shattered and hopes extinguished. Sarah felt a deep connection to these forgotten souls, their lives intertwined with hers in ways she couldn't fully explain. She began writing a book, not just about the haunted house on Cedar Lane, but about the people who had lived there, their joys, their struggles, and the legacy they left behind. Months turned into years as Sarah meticulously pieced together the puzzle of Cedar Lane. She traveled to archives in neighboring towns, unearthed photographs and letters hidden away in dusty attics, and listened to the whispered tales of those who still remembered the old house and its secrets. Her book, Echoes of Cedar Lane, became a labor of love, a tribute to the spirits who had touched her life and to the town that had shaped her understanding of the world. It was a story of redemption and forgiveness, of facing one's fears and finding peace in unexpected places. When Echoes of Cedar Lane was finally published, it resonated deeply with readers far and wide. Sarah received letters and emails from people who had their own encounters with the supernatural, who found solace in knowing that they were not alone in their experiences. But for Sarah, the greatest reward was knowing that she had honored the spirits of Cedar Lane, that their story had been told and remembered. The old house might be gone, replaced by new developments and modern conveniences, but its legacy lived on in the hearts and minds of those who had read her words. As she sat in her study, surrounded by stacks of research notes and photographs, Sarah felt a sense of fulfillment. The ghosts of Cedar Lane had led her on a journey of discovery and healing, a journey that had transformed her life and the lives of those who had dared to listen to their whispers. And as the sun set over Cedar Lane, casting long shadows over the now bustling town, Sarah whispered a silent thank you to the spirits who had guided her every step of the way, a testament to the enduring power of stories and the bonds that connect us across time and space. As Sarah's book, Echoes of Cedar Lane, gained acclaim and recognition, she found herself drawn back to the town more frequently. People from all walks of life visited Cedar Lane, intrigued by its mysterious history and the tales of the haunted house that once stood there. Over the years, Sarah became a local legend herself, a storyteller who could weave the past and present together, capturing the imaginations of those who listened to her recount the eerie events and the poignant stories of the family who had once lived on Cedar Lane. One summer afternoon, as Sarah stood in front of a small crowd gathered at the site of the old house, she felt a familiar presence, a whisper of wind that seemed to carry echoes from the past. She paused, her gaze drifting towards the empty lot where the house had once stood, now marked only by the memorial plaque. A woman approached Sarah after her talk, tears glistening in her eyes. "I grew up here," she said softly. "My grandmother used to tell me stories about the haunted house. She swore she once saw lights flickering in the attic window." Sarah smiled warmly, touched by the woman's words. "The spirits of Cedar Lane have a way of staying with us," she replied gently. "They remind us of the power of stories and the connections we share with those who came before us." As Sarah continued to delve into the history of Cedar Lane, she uncovered more layers to the town's past, stories of resilience and community, of triumphs and tragedies. Each discovery deepened her appreciation for the spirits that had guided her on this journey. One autumn day, while exploring a hidden corner of Cedar Lane, Sarah stumbled upon an old cemetery tucked away in a grove of ancient oaks. Moss-covered headstones marked the final resting places of generations of townspeople, their names weathered by time but their stories etched into the fabric of Cedar Lane's history. Among the graves, Sarah found a familiar name, the youngest daughter of the family from the old house. Emily's headstone bore a simple inscription: "Emily Carter, beloved daughter and sister, rest in peace." Standing before Emily's grave, Sarah felt a profound sense of closure. The spirits of Cedar Lane had found their peace, their stories woven into the tapestry of the town's legacy. And as she traced her fingers over Emily's name, Sarah knew that she had honored their memory in a way that went beyond words. Years later, Sarah continued to visit Cedar Lane, sharing its stories with new generations who were captivated by its mysteries. The town had embraced its haunted history, celebrating its past while looking towards the future. And as Sarah walked through the streets of Cedar Lane, her heart filled with gratitude for the spirits who had led her on this extraordinary journey. A journey of discovery, healing, and the enduring power of stories that connect us all. As Sarah continued to visit Cedar Lane and share its stories with new generations, she became deeply intertwined with the fabric of the town itself. Over time, she established a small museum dedicated to Cedar Lane's history, featuring artifacts, photographs, and documents that illustrated its rich and often haunting past. The museum became a gathering place for locals and tourists alike, drawn by Sarah's passion for storytelling and her ability to bring the past to life. School children listened wide-eyed as she recounted tales of the old house and its spectral inhabitants, while historians marveled at the meticulous research she had compiled in her book and museum exhibits. But Sarah's connection to Cedar Lane went beyond her role as a historian and storyteller. She became involved in community events, helping to preserve historic buildings and promote local heritage initiatives. She attended town meetings, advocating for the preservation of green spaces and the respectful treatment of Cedar Lane's historical sites. One spring afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at the museum, a young woman with a familiar glint of curiosity in her eyes. She introduced herself as Emma, the great-granddaughter of the woman Sarah had met years ago, who had grown up hearing stories of the haunted house on Cedar Lane. "I read your book," Emma said, her voice filled with reverence. "It brought the history of Cedar Lane to life for me in a way I never imagined." Sarah smiled warmly, inviting Emma to explore the exhibits and sharing anecdotes about the artifacts on display. As they walked through the museum, Sarah felt a sense of continuity, a passing of the torch from one generation to the next, ensuring that Cedar Lane's stories would endure. Over time, Sarah and Emma developed a friendship rooted in their shared love for Cedar Lane's history. They collaborated on projects, unearthed new discoveries together, and continued to nurture the museum as a place where the past intersected with the present. One summer evening, during a special event at the museum, Sarah stood before a crowd of locals and visitors. She spoke passionately about the enduring legacy of Cedar Lane, the resilience of its people, the mysteries that still lingered, and the profound impact of confronting the past with courage and compassion. "As we celebrate Cedar Lane's history today," Sarah said, her voice echoing through the museum halls, "let us remember that our stories are intertwined with those who came before us. They remind us of our shared humanity, our triumphs, and our capacity to heal." As the applause faded and visitors mingled among the exhibits, Sarah glanced towards the window where sunlight streamed through, casting warm hues across the artifacts that had once been shrouded in mystery. She felt a gentle breeze brush against her cheek, carrying with it a whisper of gratitude, a reassurance that the spirits of Cedar Lane had found peace, their stories embraced and cherished by those who walked in their footsteps. And as Sarah stood there, surrounded by the echoes of the past and the promise of the future, she knew that Cedar Lane would forever hold a special place in her heart, a place where history and spirit intertwined, where the power of stories continued to illuminate the path forward.